So I'm a philosopher and I work in a number of areas, but I would say that one of my core areas, if not my central area of research, is in metaphysics. And in particular, I spend a lot of time working on, I guess, what we would call the defense of neo-Aristotelianism, as it's called in contemporary metaphysics, refining and recovering and sort of rehabilitating some fairly classical or traditional notions in metaphysics which go back to Aristotle. And I have a strong interest, obviously, in philosophy of biology, hence my involvement in this project, because I can see very important connections between philosophy of biology generally and my work in Aristotelian metaphysics. So my understanding of purpose, or to use an old-fashioned word, which maybe is not so popular in some contexts, teleology, goal-directedness, as the Templeton Project emphasizes. I see purpose and these related phenomena as real, as importantly definitive of what it is to be a living thing. There is purpose in various ways all around us, in all of nature. However, when it comes to living systems, organisms and their parts and subsystems, we see a very specific kind of purposive behavior which is directed at the flourishing, the well-being, the survival, the health, the maintenance of the system in question. The parts and the systems serve the whole works for its own maintenance, regulation, reproduction and survival. So purpose for me is not merely a matter of kind of perspective or interest, but it's something that's kind of embedded in the nature of the living, and that's of crucial importance for understanding the world around us. So the project Mistakes in Living Systems has all sorts of incredible kind of aspects to it. What intrigues me most about it is the way in which we as a team have focused on a particular phenomenon within biology, namely the distinction between correctness and incorrectness in action and behavior. This is one aspect of purposiveness and arguably a distinctive way of looking at purposiveness and giving it substance and real elaboration, also from an experimental as well as a philosophical point of view. So what intrigues me particularly is this focus on mistakes, something which just doesn't come up a lot in philosophy of biology. So I think there are various potential impacts of the project, both in philosophy and in science. In philosophy of biology, I just think that it's so important to rehabilitate a strongly realistic and robust notion of purpose. But I think focusing on mistakes is a key way, I think, of doing that. So I think that our project philosophically contributes to that drive to rehabilitate purpose as a real phenomenon in biology. But I think equally interesting and important, if not more so, is the potential impact on science. Again, it depends on the extent to which biologists take up our ideas, and that's something that to a certain extent is really beyond our control. But I think the potential there is to encourage and stimulate biologists, experimental biologists, to think differently, to think out of the box a little bit when it comes to their basic lab work, to ask questions about the systems they're investigating that they might not ever have asked, that might have been in the back of their minds, but that we want to become explicit in their experimental design. And so that's something that we're trying to do and to encourage, and I think that could have a potential lasting impact on the way experimental biology is done. Well, in philosophy, I think the status quo, one would have to say, is still a certain reluctance to admit teleology and purpose, goal-directedness as real phenomena. I think the whole Templeton Global Research Project, of which we are one part, is kind of testifies to the need to, as the foundation itself says in its funding, to kind of reconceptualize, think in new ways about purpose. So clearly, that whole funding drive shows that there is a need to maybe to try and encourage new ways of thinking that give purpose life again in philosophy of biology, and we're contributing towards that. So we hope that we can, challenge the status quo in that way. As far as science goes, again, challenging the status quo again is about, as I suggested before, getting biologists to think in new ways about what they're examining. And it is quite right, I think, to observe that biologists are reluctant to take on board not just goal-directedness, but to take on board notions, even though goal-directedness is implicit in their ways of thinking, but to make it explicit in their thinking. They're a little bit wary of that, and when you talk about mistakes and correctness, they kind of immediately start thinking of values and preferences, and it's really a human thing that we're imposing on the living world, where actually we believe that this is not something that we're imposing, this is something that's embedded in all of biology, the potential for correct performance and incorrect performance, success, failure, mistake making or achievement of the objective. These are not imposed by us. So I think getting biologists to think of these as embedded within all of biology and to shape the way they do experiments is a way in which we could potentially really challenge the status quo there. So, funnily enough, I think that the biggest obstacle or potential obstacle to the success of the project is also the biggest selling point and exciting aspect of the project, which is its incredible interdisciplinarity. I mean, we have biologists, philosophers, computational modelers. It's an incredibly diverse team of really enthusiastic people who find themselves sometimes using different language to talk about the same thing or approaching the same topic from different perspectives. Now, the potential obstacle there is that we might not realize that we're talking about the same thing, and we'd be disagreeing about something, and it might take a while before all of a sudden the light bulb moment happens and we realize really we're asking the very same question, only using different vocabulary or a slightly different conceptual scheme, or just coming at it from different perspectives. But once we clarify that, then it's incredibly exciting to think, well, now we do have a point of agreement here that we didn't realize, and then we can now move forward with maybe thinking about new kinds of experiment or new ways of developing our conceptual or philosophical framework that we hadn't thought of before. So the obstacle is the obstacle with all interdisciplinarity. Now, I talk to philosophers every day of the week, and I love talking to philosophers. It's my job. But I don't often get the opportunity to sit down with working biologists, for example, or computational modelers and say, well, look, how do you understand this particular philosophical concept in the language that you use or using the methodology that you normally employ? For me, that's a rare and incredibly exciting opportunity. And I love sitting down with scientists, generally speaking, and interrogating them about their work, trying to apply my philosophical thinking to what they do and to see how they react and whether I get pushback. And sometimes I do get pushback, and the biologist will say to me, well, we don't look at it that way at all. Or sometimes they might say, I hadn't really thought of it that way. That's an interesting angle. And I love that kind of interaction. And yeah, the obstacle is not always getting the agreement that you're looking for, talking past each other, that sort of thing. But then the exciting aspect is that when you do find that agreement, when you do find that you're talking, you're on the same wavelength, that you have a way forward and you have potential new discoveries and new thinking to be had.